Hello, I'm Chris Slisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion about astrology, art, and spiritual adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore concepts that allow us to broaden our view of the world. You'll hear interesting topics, meet fascinating guests, and discover who you really are. Using the time-tested practices of astrology, you'll learn how to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Astrology, art, and spiritual adventure on Turning of the Wheel TV with Chris Slisher. Hey, welcome to Turning of the Wheel. I'm going to be continuing my discussion of the various signs over this coming episode, and today's episode we're going to be talking about the sign of Leo. Leo is the proud lion of the zodiac, and it is a sign that takes place between July 22nd and August 21st. If you're born in that time, you are going to be a Leo. It is ruled by the sun, of all things, the sun right over there. It's ruled by the sun. The sun is its ruler. So it's the big, proud, magnanimous, sort of gregarious, charismatic sign of the zodiac. It's very powerful. It is the lion. When we think of the lion, we think of the big, bold, proud creature that rules the jungle, sort of I am the king of the forest kind of a character. So interesting that it fits so nicely with the Leo sign, because that is what Leos are all about. They are very powerful, charismatic. They sort of fill the room up with their personality. They're very magnanimous, very charismatic. But they're also a fixed sign. Now, if you've listened to me in the past, you've heard me talk about the three different qualities. There's cardinal signs, which are the starters. There's fixed signs, which are the sort of the very stable ones, and there's mutable, which are more adaptive. So when we think of Leo, we know that it is a fixed fire sign. A fixed sign is a sign which is very rigid in its views, very sort of fixed, meaning that they're sort of attached. When I say fixed, think of like a block of wood nailed to the floor. That is fixed. It doesn't imply that it's not broken. It just implies that it's fixed, meaning that it's immovable. So they can be very stubborn. They can be very, very powerful in their thought process and very opinionated, so that they see things, and they typically have a very black and white sort of outlook on life, whereby their opinions are either yes or no, black or white, on or off, sort of that dualistic quality. But typically they don't vacillate from side to side. They are usually one or the other. This is very much of a fixity kind of quality. This is what we see when we think of people who are fixed, and that's what that implies. As you study astrology further, as you continue to watch this show, which I'm sure you will see that I'll use this phrase a lot, especially as I work my way through the zodiac and I get on into Scorpio, Aquarius, and of course we've already heard about Taurus, also a fixed sign. But Leo is a fixed fire sign. That's what's most important to understand. Fire signs obviously are those that are passionate. There's Aries, which is a cardinal fire sign, and Sagittarius, which is a mutable fire sign. So we have the three fire signs there, and these are all fire signs, typically get along with each other as a general rule. Obviously you may have a few friends, or enemies I should say, who are less than that, but obviously for the most part you will find people who share a similar characteristics, such as an element, will typically get along on some basic level. What's interesting about Leos is that they are this proud. Proud is the word, proud, majestic, which is why their animal that represents them is the lion. There's this proud, leonine kind of quality. There's this big, bold, charismatic kind of character that's very creative. It's very much of a room-filling kind of a character. Someone like a Bill Clinton will walk into the room and the whole room he takes up all the oxygen in the room. Interestingly enough, there's a very well-known politician on the road right now, but we all know of, who is not a Leo, but he does have Leo rising. You think I'm talking about Donald Trump. He has Leo rising, meaning his rising sign, which is the sort of the characteristic that he exudes to the world, is that of the Leo. And he is very much of that type of person, very much full of bombast and powerful speaker, charismatic, sort of takes up all the oxygen in the room regardless of who else may be in there. So this is a sort of a characteristic that you find with a Leo. Leos are, as I said, they're ruled by the sun over there. I'm just looking at this backward, right there we go. Or they're ruled by the sun, and as a result of that, they are very powerful, they are very bright, and it makes perfect sense that they appear in the northern hemisphere in the months of the summertime, which is where we are. Other characteristics about them are they tend to be dramatic, they tend to be loud. A Leo enters the room, this is no shy flower, this is a person who comes in and says, "Here I am, hear me out, hear me roar," literally, hear me roar, which is exactly what they do. And this is Interesting, because as a result of having this very strong personality, they are able to command great loyalty. They're able to command creativity. They're able to be they're very creative people. Typically, you know, the sun rules the fifth house. The fifth house is a house of children. It's also the house that rules, you know, creativity. So we find that in the fifth house as well. And I'm going to go through the houses in a few minutes. We'll get there, and you'll know if you have your son in one of those places. But overall, they have high aspirations. They are confident. They are self-assured. They say they are sort of attention-grabbing individuals. And these are all very positive qualities. Now, of course, the other side of the story is that they can be very stubborn, difficult to deal with, very domineering in their role, and as a result of that, they can be somewhat overbearing. But, you know, everybody has, all characters in the zodiac wheel are a composite of assets and liabilities. We both have all things. We all have both things, I should say. We all have assets. We all have liabilities. Regardless of who you are, regardless of what your sign is, you will have a combination of those two. This is what makes us a dualistic kind of an individual. We are always dualistic. We are balanced in this way. We've got left, we've got right. All of the characteristics of our lives, our bodies, our world are formed out of this dualism of this positive and negative. So this is something that should be seen through all people. All people have this. Let's go through the houses. If you have your son, now you know when I talked about the time of birth is incredibly important because that was what orients the chart and the houses in the chart. If you're born with the sun in Leo, it can be in one of 12 of the 12 different houses. The house that it lands in will color and dictate the type of way that you manifest your Leo-ness if you are a Leo. So if you're a Leo and you have a sun in the first house, you're going to be a very, very powerful person. You're going to be someone who will not be will be hard to reckon with, and will take no prisoners, so to speak. They are and they don't suffer fools gladly. Some people to think about that who are very strong, confident people who love being out in the crowd, are full of confidence, completely self-absorbed in some ways. And this would be a great way for you to express your leadership. You could be a great leader. And leadership can come in many different ways. You know, leadership can be in the form of, you know, being a CEO of a company. It can be, you know, being the head of a crew somewhere, or it can be President of the United States, as we have right now. Our present president, Barack Obama, is a Leo, as was Bill Clinton. Also, two big Leos who took that, and they do have a very commanding presence, regardless of how you may feel about them as politically. They have strong presences on the stage, and when they come into the room, people know that they're there. It's just sort of boom. You can't miss them. So if you have Leo in the first house, you're going to be very much of that person. You're going to wear your heart in your sleeve. You're going to roar. You're going to enter the room and you are going to roar. You're going to be a bold, confident, go where no man dares to go, and incredibly creative as well. Creative in many different ways. This is how that man will manifest. When we look at the Leo sun in the second house, we see somebody who's very good with money and financial investments. This is someone who may be inclined to work incredibly hard, who might do really well with regard to managing money, making money, and all things having to do with money. So bankers and people like that, people who are, you know, trying to be innovative and creative with money, have a strong ability to understand it. But the second house is the house of money and resources. So we think about resources, we think about budgets, we think about personnel allocations, any number of things like that come into effect at the same time when we're talking about what that quality of Leo means in the second house. When we have Leo in the third house is the house of communication, presentations, words, writing, communications, television, radio. All of those things are very much of a third house kind of character. If your son in Leo falls in the third house, it's likely that you're going to be someone who is a strong performer. This would be somebody who uses their words to express their personality, uses their words to express that strong leonine quality, you know, that characteristic that comes out and makes people pay attention. This is somebody who would be a very good newscaster, a person who would be sitting behind a camera. I'm not a Leo, but this is the kind of place you might find someone like that, whose presence was very well known on the stage. And this would be something that would be very, very powerful, because you'd find that. You would see that characteristic, good with words, good with presentations, good with film, all those things that are sort of media oriented and have to do with communication are where the third house is, rather. If you're a Leo with with your sun in the fourth house, you're going to manifest your strong leonine qualities through the presence of the family and the home. The fourth house is the house of family, the house of home, the house of children, and so you would also find that to be a very strong quality. So you might be a builder, for example. You might be somebody who works within the real estate industry. Strong Leos are very good real estate people because they know, understand the basis of the home. And you would find this very much to be the case if you had a sun in the fourth house. This would be a very, very evident for where you were and what you were doing in your life. So this is pretty key thing to understand. The next house we move to is the fifth house, which is the house that Leo rules and the sun rules. It's the house of creativity. And if we have a Leo there, we'd find someone who is a very strong, powerful, either some sort of artist of some sort. You know, the artistry is one of those things that can be manifested in many different ways, of course. You know, you can have people who are painters, you can have people who are musicians, you can have writers, anybody who's creative in some way. This is where you'd find that the creative part of this, or also the fifth house is very strong with regards to younger children, either your own or your grandchildren or something like that. This is where you'd find the presence very loud. And of course, you'd have to get a more detailed understanding of your own chart in order to get all these details, which is something I can provide for you. If you go to my website, turningofthewheel.com, you could find out how to get a hold of me and how to get your personal chart interpreted. It's much more granular than what I'm giving you right now. This is sort of the skimming of the top, just giving you an idea what it is like to be a Leo in this part of the world. So again, Leo, the fifth house, very creative. It's ruled by the sun. This is where you shine your brightest. This is where you would be finding it. As we move into the sixth house is the house of health. It's the house of sort of daily work. It's how we go through our daily lives. It has to do with you know, the healthcare industry in particular. A Leo in the healthcare industry might be a very well-known doctor, somebody who does very well working in the healthcare, or dentist, something like that. But again, this is a person who understands and it does very well in the day-to-day work. Also, this is a house of exercise and health. So you might see somebody who's a body worker, bodybuilder, a strong leonine, you know, Olympic runner or a swimmer or something like that. And I'm going to give you some names of some famous people as we go and let you know, just so you get an idea who that Leo person is. You'll see very clearly when I start reading some of the names off of people who are well-known Leos, because you'll see those characteristics come through. So again, the sixth house is the house of health, welfare, daily work, and primarily the health industry. So this is where you'd see things. Also service. This is a place where a strong Leo person would be offering up service of some kind, you know, working in the service industry. What does it mean to be in the service industry? Lawyers and doctors are service-oriented people, believe it or not. You know, that's how you have to think of it. Anybody who is there to help others in some capacity, whether that's putting in a new sink in your bathroom or fixing a broken crown in your mouth. That's where the health industry, that's where service comes in. So service has a very broad arching kind of definition that you would see very clearly in that regard. The next house we're going to go to is the seventh house. The seventh house is the house of romance and relationships. So a Leo in the seventh house is going to shine very brightly. It's going to be this kind of person who bases a lot of their existence around how they relate to others. And this would be a great place for someone who is a diplomat, someone who spent time in the diplomatic corps, trying to bridge gaps, trying to, you know, massage differences with people. This is an excellent point for people to be there because they do really well in this part. And oftentimes you'll find someone, in this case, the opposite of Leo would be Aquarius. This is the opposite of Leo. You might find somebody in that relationship very, very crisp there, because oftentimes the opposites do attract. The seventh house has to do with close friends as well. So you've got a Leo with that. You've got an abundance of friendship, and relationships are key to that person's success. So they're going to have to manipulate their grandiose personality. They're going to have to work in a way that allows them to be forceful, but also compliant in some ways. Because in order to get along with somebody else, every relationship is a matter of give and take. You've got to give a little bit in order to get a little bit. So this is very much the case with that particular case. Next house is the eighth house. Now the eighth house is typically reserved for, I'm going to say sex and death. Those are two big words. I know it's not as dire as that sounds like, but it's more about regeneration. And so when we think about regeneration, we think about starting over again. This is sort of that's why sex and death are there, because sex is the beginning, death is the end. But this is the house of regeneration, but it's also the house of spirituality, and it's the house of other people's money, interestingly enough. So here we might, and it's exactly opposite the second house, which as mentioned was earlier before was about money as well. But this is about other people's money. So here's where you might find a hedge fund manager who's got a strong ability to be creative in that area. And this is an excellent spot for people to think about things along the lines of outside investments, small startups, running large municipalities. It's also, the 8th house is also where large organizations reside, and that's the spot where they're most prevalent and have the most of their influences felt. So the 8th house is about large organizations. So municipal government, universities, federal government, state government, all those big government entities and big large insurance companies, large corporations. That's where, if you were Leo in that 8th house, you would do very well in large organizations, and expressly if you were managing other people's money other than your own. So you could easily be someone who works in the banking industry, and that's how you play out your role best, is by managing other people's money in a very forceful and creative way. The next house we go to is the 9th house. The 9th house is the house of education, travel, and spirituality. Now, the 8th house is also about spirituality, but it's more about religion than it is about spirituality. So if you're a religious person, you might consider the 8th house. But in the 9th house, it's more about spirituality and sort of the great sense of adventure. The 9th house is actually the house ruled by Sagittarius, which is another air sign, and it has, a fire sign, excuse me, and it has that wonderful quality of sort of the idea of the adventurer. This is the great adventurer. This is where people travel. This is where they learn to educate. So a 9th house Leo might be somebody who's a very strong instructor, someone who travels a lot for their work, someone who loves the wanderlust appeal of what it means to travel. And that might be very well evident in the type of person who does that, and especially itself as well. Also in the 9th house, we see this strong spiritual component as well. So sometimes you might, someone who's a deeply religious person does end up showing up there. They have the ability to be that person. This is what's remarkable about astrology. When you do the actual charts based on the birth date, the birthplace, and the birth time, you can get the granularity that I am not providing for you right now. I'm giving you an overall broad brushstroke of what all Leos are like in certain places of the wheel. When your particular house and your particular chart comes down and those 3 pieces of data are there, I can hone in very quickly, very clearly, and see exactly where the aspects are, what makes you tick. Because where the sun is, there's going to be planets that are going to be reacting with that based on the geometry of the individual astrology chart. And this is where astrology is incredibly rich. I can take a perfect stranger, know nothing about them other than their birth date, their birthplace, their birth time, and I will be able to hone in immediately on that person without knowing anything about them. I've done this thousands of times on the air, across the country, across the globe, on my podcast, which is on iTunes. Always there, I can just hear this happening. I hear these people calling in. I don't know them from a hole in the wall, and yet, boom, I understand what's going on with them. It's fascinating discovery and incredibly enlightening when it comes to who you are, especially when it comes to trying to decide how to make major decisions. Do I get married? Do I buy a house? Do I change my job? Do I have kids? All those are very important life decisions that can be timed, and if they're properly addressed, can be timed at the right space and time in your life, and it'll have the maximum impact. Also, the same is true if you do it at the wrong time, you may have negative repercussions as a result. Okay, we're moving on to the 10th house. The 10th house is the house of career. So a Leo in the 10th house is going to be a very successful career-oriented person. Now, career is also I also refer to career as occupation. And the reason I use the word occupation is because occupation is how we occupy our time. Yes, occupation does imply career. However, occupation also implies how we spend our time. A person who is home caring for somebody all day long, their career is staying home caring for someone all the time. They may not be getting paid for it, although they should. It is a matter of how they occupy their time. If you're a full-time student, that's how you're doing it. If you're, whatever your occupation may be, that is determined by that part of the chart. And it's the 10th house. If your sun is in Leo in the 10th house, you are probably a very potent leader in the business world or whatever world that you are in, whatever sector that you are in, you're going to find yourself in a very, very strong position with regard to how you manage your job, your career, and how you lead. This is where leadership really counts. The 10th house of Leo is a very strong Leo who has the ability to get in there, stand up, take charge and run a company, run an organization, run whatever it may be. This is a very powerful spot for them to be, and they are quite effective there. And I suspect that they're a very difficult negotiator, but driven to be creative, driven to be number one, driven to sort of step up to the podium and be the big CEO and understand what it is like to be that powerful figure. The next house we're going to is the 11th house. The 11th house is the house of groups and business associates. These are people that you associate with. It's very similar to the 7th house, but the 7th house is more related to romance and personal loves, whereas the 11th house is more about friendships and business associations. If you have a son in the 11th house, you are all about being creative with regard to other people. How do you work together? How do you manage to keep your business relationships together? How do you fuse your mutual talents together? How do you become a builder? How do you improve transparency? How do you get diplomacy to work? How do you get all these people to work together in a way that's harmonious? It's where you do really well. As leader with groups, this is a good place for a salesman as well, because it might be an area where they are doing negotiations, where they're trying to pass laws, trying to get things done. It all has to do with business and business associations. If you're a Leo with that 11th house, you're going to find that you're going to find yourself to be very driven by what it means to work with other people. This is a very important part of who you are. And I would say that overall, you know, working with people, even though Leos tend to be fixed, and they are fixed, they tend to be, they are fixed, they're fixed signs as I mentioned. Even though they're fixed signs, when it comes to working with others, this is where you find a strong negotiator, somebody who knew how to negotiate for the proper way that they wanted to do this. This is what's very important. And everything I'm saying here also applies to people who have different kinds of rising signs at that same time. If you have a Leo rising sign, as I mentioned earlier, with Donald Trump, you're going to see that as well. The best way to find this information out, though, is to get in touch with me and see what looks like, how things look on the grand stage of your personal chart, because a lot of this is going to happen. Because, you know, you may be a Leo with a strong Leo quality, but you're not going to have you're going to have perhaps a soft moon, a Pisces moon, for example, or a Cancer moon. That's going to diffuse a lot of what you're going to see in that part of the thing. You're going to see a lot of deflection there. You're not going to see the same sort of, you're going to see a much softer Leo. So there are Leos, and I'm just going to digress for a few minutes here before we go on to the 12th house. There are Leos who have softer characteristics. You may be a Leo at your core. Your sun is a Leo sun. You've got a sun in Leo. You're born in Leo. You're born at this time of the year. And yet you've got a soft Cancer moon, or you've got you know, an ascendant in Pisces. That is going to dampen down that characteristic considerably, especially if you have, you know, an abundance of water in your chart. You know, you've got two water signs, Cancer and Pisces, for example, as moon and rising sign in your chart, and yet you're a Leo. You're going to express yourself much different in that regard. So this is an important piece to remember, because it really does. This is how the astrology changes with each person. That's why there are no two people that are the same. Even twins are not the same. This is where we see this huge difference with regard to how people respond. This is where the real truth of the matter comes in. And as a result of that, we see great variances in people. But that can only be determined by an accurate reading of the astrology chart by someone such as myself or another astrologer. So I encourage you to do that. Moving on to the 12th house, Leo in the 12th house. If you're born with Leo sun in the 12th house, you're in the 12th house is the house of transition. And the house of transition typically indicates new beginnings and endings. So out of every ending comes a beginning. And I encourage you to think of it that way. I always use the example. People often are upset when they hear the word transition. They think of transition as an end. And I would say, yes, it is an end. But what does it mean to end? And how do we frame that in the context of what makes sense and what is, you know, what's valuable to us? When we think of an ending, I always use the example of a pregnancy. At the end of a pregnancy, you have a baby. That's typically the outcome of a pregnancy, which is a very positive, wonderful, life-changing, gorgeous thing to have happen to anybody in life, is to have the birth of a new baby, enter into the world healthy, happy, ready to go. Now, I'm not saying everybody has that opportunity, but that is a good metaphor for what I mean by endings and beginnings. A pregnancy comes to an end, a baby is born, it's a new beginning. A job comes to an end, you get a new job, it's a new beginning. A marriage comes to an end. Sometimes that's the best thing that can happen to people. They start over again, they rebuild their lives, people move. It's a transition, that's an ending, but the new place they move to may be better. We never really know. We're far more comfortable in areas that we are familiar with, that may be uncomfortable, than we are changing to something that we don't know. Now, I'm going to repeat that. We are far more likely to stay with a place that is maybe unpleasant but familiar, rather than move to something we don't know, because the familiarity, we know what the arena is like, we know what the landscape's like. When we change that, we don't know what we're entering into. Now, most of us are very fearful of that. We don't know what to expect. But sometimes when you take that jump, leap and the net will appear, so to speak. All of a sudden you may find yourself in a spot where you're like, wow, why didn't I do this years ago? Why didn't I leave that jerk a long time ago? Or why did I keep this job for so long? All those kinds of metaphors are there, those examples I'm using. And I'm tongue-in-cheek to some extent here. But it is about that. And it is a characteristic that is worth noting, because the House of Transition does indicate that there's going to be a lot of change in your life, perhaps a lot of significant movement in that life. But those are things to celebrate. Those are things to jump into rather than run away. You always want to try to run towards. You want to try to embrace whatever seems to be difficult in your life. And when you do that, you'll find yourself empowered in ways that you wouldn't have been otherwise. Knowing your astrology chart is incredibly valuable, because it is your journey. It is your owner's manual. It's your owner's manual. I use that phrase all the time. If you had, if you went out and bought a car or a bicycle or a chainsaw or a microwave, whatever you want to buy, they always come with a manual, and the manual tells you how to operate it safely. Don't do this, do that. Don't do that, do this. And as a result, all those instructions are there. So if we look at the astrology chart for every individual, which is the complete, crisp analysis of the individual based on birth date, place, and time, then we have a clear portrait of who that person is. I had this done to me when I was 20 years old. I'm now way beyond that, and I've learned and I've maintained that fascination with astrology ever since. It is completely accurate. I'm running out of time, but I want to give you a list of some names of people who are famous Leos, so you'll be able to get your head around what those people are. When I start reading off these names, you'll say, of course, no wonder. First one I'm going to read off, none other than Lucille Ball. Now, those of you who remember Lucille Ball, you may not be old enough, but if you do a Google on Lucille Ball, you'll see a wild, powerful, charged, red-haired comedian of the highest order with a personality that was unstoppable. She was a dynamo. She was a pioneer, so she's very creative. A pioneer in television. She set a role model and sort of set the stage for many female comedians to follow. She was a die-hard, wonderful, charismatic person with a huge personality. Alfred Hitchcock. Anybody who's ever watched Psycho or The Rear Window or any of his other films, or even the Alfred Hitchcock Theater movies, you would know he is a very powerful, you could see that strong, creative person there. Bill Clinton I mentioned, Barack Obama I mentioned, Madonna. Madonna's another clear person. You don't just get up on stage and dance around like that without having some sort of inner confidence. And speaking of that, who else do you think is Leo? None other than Mick Jagger. Now, he may not be that tall. He's not that tall. He's only about 5'4", 5'5", something like that. But that guy is a dynamo. If you've ever seen the Rolling Stones or seen them on stage or anything else, you know that guy is a machine. And he's got a personality that takes up the whole stage, takes up the whole room. Their whole logo, that gigantic tongue, is a manifestation of Mick Jagger himself. So he's like a classic Leo person. He's like, here I am, hear me roar. You're not taking your eyes off me for a second. And that's how he lives his life. In the more contemporary world, I mean, not that those guys aren't contemporary, but Francois Hollande, who is the president of France, is a Leo. And you've seen the way he's handled the recent, the tragedies that France has been through over the last last year or so. It's a terrible time for them. Fidel Castro, another famous Leo. And also Kevin Spacey and Tom Brady. I encourage you to keep looking. It's great to have you here watching this. Next month, it'll be Virgo, and I'll talk to you all then.